Hello everyone, welcome to Personality Lab. Your hosts are Coco, me, Caribel, and Chanelee. Today we're diving into the topic of personality and how it influences resilience.
So to start off, what exactly is resilience and what does it mean to be resilient?
Resilience is defined by most people as the ability to recover from setbacks, adapt to challenges, and continue to move forward in the face of adversity.
Yeah, and resilient people usually share certain traits. Some characteristics of resilient people can be things like knowing their own boundaries, they're able to keep good company, and they cultivate self-awareness, they practice acceptance, they have a list of self-care habits, they consider the possibilities, and they're able to get out of their head.
Okay, that gives us a good idea of what resilience looks like. But what about personality? How does that play a role? Are certain traits linked to being more resilient?
Definitely. A 2023 study by Nito and colleagues in the Scandinavian Journal of Psychology looked at resilience in relation to personality, hopelessness, and age. They found that people who score higher in resilience tend to have lower neuroticism, greater emotional stability, and less hopelessness. At the same time, traits like extroversion, openness, agreeableness, and conscientiousness were also high in resilient individuals.
And building on that, researchers have also described a resilient personality profile, typically someone who scores low in neuroticism and higher in positive social traits like extroversion and conscientiousness. These individuals tend to show stronger psychological adjustment overall.
Interesting. I wonder if resilience is innate. Is someone more resilient than another because of their genetic makeup?
That's a great question. Early resilience research, especially Emmy Werner's 40-year-old COI study, actually showed that resilience isn't something you're simply born with. Even children who grew up in really difficult environments were able to develop into confident and capable adults when they had certain protective factors in their lives. Some of these included having good problem-solving skills, supportive communities, and access to stable routines. So while genetics might play a small role, the research suggests that resilience is largely shaped by environment and experiences over time. In other words, it's something that can be learned and strengthened.
Well, that said, genetics and biology do play a part. They just aren't the whole story. For example, one biological factor linked to resilience is how well the HPA axis works. That's a system in our body that controls our stress response. People who are more resilient usually shows a healthy cortisol pattern. It rises under stress and then returns to normal. When this system doesn't regulate well, cortisol stays high for too long, which can make coping with stress harder.
There are also certain generic variants, like one called FKBP5, that can increase vulnerability to stress. People with this variant may have a harder time regulating stress hormones, especially if they also experience trauma in childhood. But even then, it doesn't mean they're destined to struggle, just that the risk is higher. Positive experiences and supportive environments can still make a huge difference.
So what helps balance out that risk?
One of the strongest protective factors is having positive social relationships. Even one person who offers stability, emotional support, or consistent encouragement can really shape how someone responds to stress. It creates a sense of security and hope, two things that make it easier to cope with hard experiences.
A powerful example comes from an interview with Francine, a Holocaust survivor who was deported to the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp at age 8. She talks about how her mother gave her pieces of chocolate and told her to save them for moments when the pain felt unbearable. One day, a starving pregnant woman arrived at the camp, and Francine's mother told her to give the chocolate to the woman instead. It was the compassion and the sense of being cared for that helped Francine build resilience during an unimaginably traumatic time.
And another example is Irene Villa, a survivor of a Spanish terrorist attack. In an interview, she explained that her mother played the biggest role in her healing. Her mom taught her that she had two choices: carry bitterness and live in constant suffering, or choose optimism and rebuild her life with joy. Irene said that if she didn't forgive the terrorists, she would be the one trapped in anger, not them. Her mother's guidance helped her move forward instead of staying stuck in the trauma.
I think it's beautiful how these two figures have now decided to become sources of support for others, telling their story and sharing their experience. These two stories really show how resilience can grow from the presence of even one caring, supportive figure. But relationships aren't the only factor. What else helps build resilience?
Besides prioritizing relationships, fostering wellness by practicing mindfulness helps a lot, whether that's journaling, meditating, or doing yoga. Actually, that's what's interesting, is that one method called the loving kindness meditation has been backed up by science for improving daily positive emotions.
What is loving kindness meditation?
It's an ancient Buddhist practice that cultivates goodwill and universal friendliness toward oneself and others. It involves repeating supportive phrases in your mind. Practicing it regularly has been shown to increase emotional awareness and reduce stress, which makes it easier for people to handle tough situations without shutting down.
Positive psychotherapy helps too. It's a newer approach that mixes ideas from humanistic and psychodynamic therapy, but with a different focus. Instead of centering everything on what's wrong with someone, it tries to highlight what's going well. It encourages people to build on their strengths, practice gratitude, and find meaning in their experiences. When someone starts paying attention to the positive parts of their life, it can boost their sense of hope and confidence, both of which are huge for resilience.
I love that.
And when we talk about boosting resilience by building up those small daily positive emotions, another question naturally comes up. Does our happiness depend more on the things that happen to us or on how much of it actually comes from within ourselves?
Yeah, that is a really interesting question.
Have you guys heard about the ISEN experiment by Alice Eisen? It's an experiment that shows how positive emotion affects our thinking and behavior.
Oh, tell me more about that.
So Alice Eisen found that even a small boost in positive emotions can significantly change how people think, decide, and act. In her famous experiments, participants were given tiny mood lifters like receiving a small gift, finding a coin, or watching a short funny clip. Then they were given cognitive or decision-making tasks.
Yeah, the findings show that participants who were in a good mood were able to solve problems faster and more creatively, and they were more likely to help others like volunteering, assisting the experimenter, or returning a lost object.
So, according to this experiment, we would conclude that happiness and mood aren't just emotional states, but they can actually change how the brain works. A good mood can lead to better decision making, more generosity, and higher creativity.
It was found that 40% of our happiness depends on genetic reasons, 10% depends on what happens to us, and 50% depends on ourselves. So why is this important?
Well, the Eisen experiment directly connects to the question of whether our happiness depends more on external events or on internal factors. Her findings show that even tiny external events, like receiving a small gift or finding a coin, can briefly boost our mood. But what matters more is how we internally respond to those events. The positive mood didn't come from life-changing circumstances. It came from something very small. Yet that small shift changed how people thought and solved problems. This suggests that happiness is not determined solely by what happens to us, but by the internal emotional systems we activate in response to those events.
In other words, external factors can trigger changes, but it is ultimately our internal mindset, interpretation, and emotional tendencies that shape how happy we feel and how resilient we become.
And another study that really shows this is the nun study. Researchers looked at autobiographies written by young nuns in their early 20s and scored how many positive emotions they expressed. Decades later, they discovered something remarkable. The nuns who wrote with the most joy, gratitude, and optimism ended up living about 7 years longer than the one who showed very little positive emotion.
And honestly, you can see this in real life too, not just in research.
Yeah, like,
Imagine two people getting caught in the rain on the way to class. Same situation, soaking wet, annoying, unexpected. One person gets irritated for the rest of the day, complains about it, and stays in a bad mood. The other person just laughs it off, takes it as a funny moment, maybe even enjoys the cool air after the heat.
Right. The event is identical, but the emotional outcome is completely different because of the internal response.
Exactly. It's a perfect example of how happiness isn't only shaped by what happens to us, but by how we interpret those little moments.
it really shows just how powerful positive emotions are. They're not just feelings in the moment. They can shape our resilience and even our long-term health.
So, to wrap up, what we've learned today is that resilience isn't something you're just born with. It's shaped by personality, experiences, and the support around you.
Yes, and small positive moments like acts of kindness or a tiny mood booster can really influence how we think, make decisions, and handle challenges.
Exactly. It's about how we respond internally to what happens around us.
So by focusing on our mindset, nurturing relationships, and practicing positive habits, we can strengthen our resilience and overall well-being.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thanks again to Caribel, Chanelee, and Coco for joining me today on Personalities Lab.